Welcome to Divinity Original Sin 2. This time we are going to take a look in the guide Lone Wolf or No Lone Wolf. I've been asked the question quite a couple of times, what exactly does Lone Wolf do and how does it change the game balance? Specifically, is it stronger or isn't it stronger? So I want to take a couple of minutes and I've prepared an actual example for you to firsthand see what Lone Wolf has to offer. And to start with a conclusion, if you're going to play Lone Wolf, it will make the game significantly easier. So it is almost an easy mode, although it might be counterintuitive. So let's look at Lone Wolf specifically. What does Lone Wolf do? Lone Wolf is a specific talent which also promotes a certain game style. Lone Wolf says as long as you're alone, or in maximum in the companionship of one further companion, you get certain bonuses. So naturally the idea behind Lone Wolf was that the game is supposed to be harder because you have less characters. You will get a little bit of an offset to make the characters just a tiny bit stronger, but overall the lower number of characters means also a lower number of actions. But does it really mean that? And we're going to explore exactly what it means. So to start the argumentation what Lone Wolf does, let me first of all go through exactly what it does so you guys understand it, and then I will explain why exactly Lone Wolf is significantly stronger than the normal game. So playing Lone Wolf is as strong in my opinion as to turn down the game difficulty by one level. If you would play on Tactician, it becomes almost normal game. If you play on a normal game, it becomes Explorer mode, and I don't know, there's no mode underneath Explorer mode, but basically it simply becomes to be a stomp. And why is that the case? So you're giving up two characters, which de facto means you are cutting your resources in half. But both of the characters get certain bonuses. So the bonuses that the characters receive are 2 ability points as their maximum and 2 ability points recovery per round tops, which means that instead of having 6 ability points maximum and 4 ability points every round, or 4 action points rather, you are starting with 6 action points every round, and you're going to have 8 action points maximum. Now that means if you just do the math, you're actually trading 16 action points, so 4 characters with 4 action points, for 12 action points. 2 characters with effectively 6 action points. And that is going to be very important because a lot of the argumentation for Lone Wolf will be that the designers actually haven't considered well enough the value of an action point and what Lone Wolf characters can do with an action point. So basically you're losing 25% of the resources, action points so to speak, during the combat. Now you would say, well, you know what, Syken, that is worse, so why would I even play that? Listen on, there are a couple of bonuses that are relevant. So first and foremost, you get a plus 30% vitality bonus, plus 30% physical armor bonus, and plus 30% magical armor bonus. Specifically, I cannot stress enough how the armor and the vitality bonus will come handy in play, because effectively, as long as you have them, most of the attacks effectively, specifically the crowd control, will not affect you whatsoever. So on top of that, you gain 2 times or twice the amount of attribute points and combat abilities. And now hold on for a second. There is still a kicker to it. Not only do you get twice the amount of attribute points and combat points, which means on 2 characters you have the same amount of attribute points and the same amount of combat points overall, you also gain increased maximum levels. Instead of capping at 40, the stats now cap at 70, and instead of capping at 10, most of the abilities cap at 20, polymorph excluded. So what does that mean, and how does it all tie together? I'm trying to explain it in the easiest possible way, why exactly the lone wolf characters are now stronger. Let's start with the action points. You lose 25% of the action points, and you only have 12 instead of 16 action points. But I'm going to show you that the actual value of the action points is significantly higher. Let's assume for a second you deal 100 damage with a normal character using 2 action points. So that's kind of the average. Let's assume that just for a second. Which means with your 16 action points, you're dealing 800 points of damage. So basically 8 attacks. Now the kicker for Lone Wolf is due to the massive exponential scaling, both on the attributes as well as on the combat abilities, you are effectively no longer dealing 133% of 133% damage. You would hit for probably around 200 to 300 damage with an equally equipped and equally skilled character, which means with 12 action points, all of a sudden you no longer just hit for the same 800 damage. If you would hit for 300 per strike and you have 4 attacks, all of a sudden you hit for 1200, so almost 150% of the overall damage, although you do have less action points. And the story even goes further than that. Due to the exponential scaling, it gets worse and worse the further you progress in the game. A lone wolf character relatively soon can already reach breakpoints which normal characters wouldn't reach. One example being the summoning tree, where the lone wolf character, specifically at level 3, already can have incarnate champions. That's a solid unit which probably single-handedly clears all of Act 1. So they will not only have a very strong early game, they also have scaling advantage. And let me show you what I'm talking about in a very simple example. I've created 2 characters, and with the exception of one being a human and one being a dwarf, which is there's a minor difference in health because the dwarf gets 10% more health. Everything else is similar. And let me start with the dwarf. So the build is relatively simple. Both characters obviously are level 15. You can see both characters carry level 15 appropriate gear. The absolute standard gear, I did not even start to attach all of it. I just wanted to give you an example, and we will share the same weapon, Elven Two-Hander in this case. Now, the build is relatively straightforward. It focuses completely on damage. You can see it is a strength-based build. 150% extra damage from strength. So here you can see the normal maximum for a skill is 40 points, and for an attribute is 40 points. And you would see effectively that's plus 150% damage. The combat abilities of this characters are also super straightforward. 10 warfare, 6 two-handed. So really plain vanilla, easiest build possible. You see, we end up with 1,170 hit points. If you deduct the sturdiness bonus from the dwarf, I would say we are roughly netting at in between 1,050 and 1,100 hit points. So keep it in mind, around 1,000-ish hit points, give and take. Now, the dwarf itself, with this equipment, will deal 330 to 360 damage, has a critical strike chance of about 10%, and a multiplier of 180%, which means if he crits for 10% of the time and multiplies the damage by 180%, it's about 18% additional damage. So you could say his expected damage will be around 370 to 400-ish. Just so we have the numbers straight. 1,000 hit points, about 400 damage, a little bit less than 400 damage. I'm taking the same weapon here, by the way. I'm going to take the Lone Wolf variant. Mind you, the only thing on this character that is specific is that he has a rose elixir, but you will see for the argumentation it doesn't even make any difference. Now, alone from the strengths, we can see instead of 150% extra damage, we're already talking about 300% extra damage, right? And you can see that with 20 Warfare and the talent Picture of Health, which, by the way, just to prove it, both have the same talents. You see Executioner, Picture of Health, Opportunist. The only thing here which is different is Picture of Health and Lone Wolf. I netted Spider's Kiss by giving the one of them Wits and the other Constitution, so that's net equal. They stat-wise are exactly the same, just to prove that. And also you can see here the gear is absolutely the same, so no differences. Now, why is it that he deals so much more damage? The way that damage is calculated is through the exponential curve of the damage calculation. Multiple things play together. Number one, Warfare multiplies the damage, okay? Number two, Strength additionally multiplies the damage. So you can see if you hover over damage, you will see Warfare increases it by 100 instead of by 50%, and then another plus 305% Strength bonus, and all of these values are multiplicative. Then with the same weapon in the end, you end up with about 800 damage just with a normal strike, and mind you that he has about a 20% crit chance for 210% crit multiplier, which effectively means about 40% increased damage. And if you add that on top of it, he easily nets around 1100 damage. Just to compare it, we had 400-ish damage here, and we have a little bit more than 1000 damage with this guy. And that doesn't even take anything into account other than just a pure build. Now, what makes it even worse is, I just explained that a single action point for a Lone Wolf character is so much more valuable. Now imagine certain abilities like the Elven Racial ability, which allows you with your Flesh Sacrifice to get an additional action point. Certain abilities like Ferocious Herb Mix. Here we it's not the alertness. It was the Ferocious Herb Mix. Basically, the additional 2 action points per round that you gain. Abilities like Haste, or even very hardcore abilities like Fane's Racial Ability, which is Time Walk, where you basically sacrifice 2 action points and a source point in order to give another character a full extra turn, was balanced around the idea that Fane gives up 2 action points and a source point, and another character gains 4 action points in return. Now, if you think about this scenario here, and Fane gives up 2 action points and a source point, but another character gains 8 action points, assuming that he, for instance, is herb mixed, or even only 6 action points, and each of the action points on top of that accounts for way more damage, you can easily see how all of this cascades and scales out of oblivion. You are reaching levels where this damage here, 800 or 1000 damage, even though it's white gear, and even though I haven't skilled anything, not even a special skill, just with clicking on an enemy at level 15, I would 2-shot a normal enemy. Let alone with source points, probably even 2-shot a boss with the necessary source abilities, and that's not even really proper gear. If you would gear up this character, he would probably 1-shot pretty much everything, and that's the big issue with Lone Wolf. You know that most of the fights are so damage dependent. If you can take a character out of the mix, that will effectively net you a huge bonus. Now you can argue, okay, ultimately you do have only a limited amount of armor, but I mean, look at that. Just compare the physical armor. 1300 here versus 800 here. That's a 150% armor, and that's not even taking into account that higher levels in geomancy, for instance, will automatically raise that even over proportionally higher. So the whole argument about like being too squishy just doesn't really matter when you're doing Lone Wolf. You can use invisibility potions, you can use feign death, you can technically just walk away or use movement abilities. In 99.9% of all of the combats, there is simply no vulnerability. If you unload on an enemy and the boss immediately dies, then the challenge is basically over. There is no more combat. So, I hope that was a good explanation and gave you a little bit of an insight why exactly Lone Wolf characters just scale up. And I'm sure I'll get a couple of comments saying, you know what, Saiken, I mean, in theory, all nice and well, but still, it feels difficult. I highly invite you, play your character, play the game with a 4-man party, and then just for fun, maybe in the mid of the game in Act 2, reskill two of your characters into Lone Wolf and just give it a try, and you will see the game feels like a breeze. That's the reason why I personally do not play Lone Wolf at the moment. It's just, in my opinion, a very, very broken talent. But if you're looking for an easy and accessible way of playing the game, then I can highly recommend you to give Lone Wolf a try. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed the guide, please give it a thumbs up and write suggestions of further guides or questions that you do have. Thank you.